So it's 5 minutes past 8 UK time where I am. So we're going to make a start. And thank you so much for sparing time to join me on this session for Azure Core Services. So for those of us who joined the previous session, we did go through what Azure concepts are, what this Azure thing is, and what is cloud in general, and what we can find on cloud and the benefits of using cloud services. So today we are now going to see what we have on Azure Core Services. So part of our today's session, it will involve some slides and explanation, and we're also going to have a live demo on some of these services we're talking about Azure. So the things we're looking to cover today is to help you understand the architectural components of Azure and also some of the services and products which form Azure Cloud, which is a Microsoft-based cloud. Some of the solutions which form part of Azure. I'm pretty sure some of us on this call have had some of these solutions, or we have heard the buzzwords, people talking about these things out there. And also, most importantly, how we manage our services on Azure. So we discussed a little bit of regions last week. So Microsoft have data centers everywhere around the globe. At the point of today of this session, Microsoft is the biggest cloud provider with lots of global regions, more than any other cloud provider, with 54 regions. And those 54 regions, they are represented by 140 countries. So what that means here, these data centers, these countries representing these regions, Microsoft, and at the same time organizations, they are empowered to use some of these services. So one of the things I need to make you understand is a region in itself. It's a geographical area which contains at least one or multiple data centers. Reason I say one is we have one country, which is Brazil, which has only one data center. So it is the only country which has one data center. And most of these data centers, which are owned by Microsoft, they are paired. So as we go through the session, I will explain to you a bit more what we mean by pairs. So with the global presence Microsoft have with these data centers, it gives a lot of people and organizations the ability and flexibility to scale their applications and closer to their users when needed. So gone are those days where we need to connect to a service and now we have to go through a lot of hoops on the internet to get to the actual service we need. So now there's an ability to give you these services ready for you to use in your local area. Most of the Azure services, when you deploy them, you can choose the region. So keep in mind the word you can choose the region. I'm going to show you how we do that today. And some of the services you find on virtual machines. So what virtual machines are, they represent a physical computer on the cloud. So basically, this is a physical computer which is on the cloud. The only difference is you don't see the CD drive, you don't see the USB, you don't see the power socket. So that's basically what a virtual machine is. So some of these services which are provided on Azure, some virtual machine features, they may not be available in your own region. And most of the reason behind that is a strategic reason and also a business decision as well. There's no point of you trying to sell products in an area where you know people won't buy them or people won't use them. So these services and data centers. Okay, so what we're talking about here, we're talking about uh, data centers. Data centers, in a nutshell, is basically a physical building which hosts these systems. And like I said in our previous session, these buildings, you never know where they are, mainly because of security. So we're going to go to the next slide. So in our next slide, we're talking about a region. So most of these services or most of these data centers, they are paired. So if you see, for example, in this slideshow, you have North Central US and is pairing to South Central US. Most of the reason behind that is to provide resilience and also to give failover options. As we all know, disasters do happen across the globe. We could have some flooding, we could have a fire, we could just have an earthquake, if not any natural disaster could happen, or even a man-made disaster. So, so what that means is most of the time, if you see here, I've put in these slides, Microsoft or any cloud provider, normally there is 300 miles between the two locations. One, it's if you can see a flood happening on the west coast in the America, is sometimes it doesn't get to the south coast. So that means the data center is still okay. Of course, that doesn't guarantee safety, but the probability of the two areas being hit at the same time will be different. So for those colleagues in the UK, you can give an example of the data centers, one being in London and one being in Cardiff. That's where it is in the UK. So the distance there is huge. So even if there is any man-made disaster, if there is any activity which affects the data center in London, Cardiff will always be available. So the chances of these being affected all together at the same time, they are very, very slim. So why do you need to understand this for yourself? So one of the other things as well is even though there is a 300-mile separation, there's also a security concern when it comes to having these data centers. So a good example here, if you see Africa started having data centered recently, one of the main concerns was security, making sure the building is not going to be destroyed, making sure the building is safe, making sure there's also cooling systems, because you're talking about systems running at very, very, very high speeds. So they need the ability to cool down. So that's one of the reasons why it was a bit slow in going to other regions. So it's not just Africa alone. In some other countries, it can also be political. So it takes a lot of time between Microsoft, the provider, to have agreements in place with either governments or continents to say, okay, this is what we're looking to do, and that's how it's going to work. So main reason for you here, it's when you happen to go to a job, when you're doing any consultancy work or any business really with any organization, and they're using Microsoft Azure. You might get a job, it might be in UK, and it might be in the Americas, it might be even in Africa. The very first thing you need to understand is the regulations of that country. Are they happy for their data to be outside their country? Apart from them being happy from having their data outside, there's also a performance implication. So I'm pretty sure you know, if you have your data center in South Africa and you're working in the UK, to get there, you'll connect, but the speed is not the same as connecting to a data center in UK. So one of the things which Microsoft have done to try and help that problem, they introduced something which you'll see as we go along, something called CDN, Content Delivery Networks, which helps you to have the user data closer to them. So we're talking about these pairs, right? So when Microsoft are bringing updates to these systems, they do not bring the updates in one go to say, okay, we have two data centers in UK. We're going to update them at the same time. No, it doesn't work like that. So they're always behind. So normally it's a month behind the other. So main reason for that is those updates they are deploying. In some cases, they also do come across bugs. As much as Microsoft are a huge organization, they do come across some bugs as well. So what that means is they need to find mechanisms to resolve those issues. So if they have one data center which is working and running to the expected behavior, then it helps them to move things to run on another data center. And what they normally do at that point, they can roll back. So when I mean roll back, they can go back to the previous state, which means your organization is not affected, your service is not affected as well. So in some cases, I don't know, in recent times, for those who use WhatsApp, you've had WhatsApp was down, you've had Facebook was down, you've had Instagram was down. In most of the cases, the time is down is not over 5 hours, if not over 24 hours. Most of the time what they do what's a failover. So they move the connection to their services to a working data center. So they just basically switch it over. So the moment they're switching it over, that's the point we're struggling trying to get to the service. But at the same time, before they just fail over, sometimes they do some checks just to make sure they're not going to disappoint their customers. So these checks are always done consistently. So if a customer happens to say to you, okay, you want us to go to the cloud, what if the computer switches off? How are we going to recover it? How are you going to switch it on again? So simple answer there is you need to be able to explain region pairs to your customer. You need to explain region pairs to any conversation which comes across in terms of outage, in terms of recovery. Guys, if you have any questions in terms of our region pairs, please feel free to type them in the chat window. If there's no questions on that front at the moment, please, again, as we go along, feel free to bring up any questions you may have. So we spoke about a region, and now we're talking about geographies. So I'm going to ask a question. I'm not expecting everybody to get it right. If you happen to have an idea and you want to share that idea in the chat window, I would really appreciate that. So, can anyone tell me what's currently happening in China in the past few years, apart from the coronavirus, in terms of data? If anyone have any idea of what's currently happening in China, or at the same time, we can even talk about the UK in terms of Brexit. If anyone can tell me the main consistencies or things which are similar between UK and China at the moment. So we have Brexit and we have China. So if you can type in any suggestions there, that would be appreciated. So we have someone who says 5G, brilliant. Anyone else? 5G, okay. Okay, so we have something in terms of 5G. Uh, Definitely, that's a concern. So the whole thing about 5G, the way it comes back to is China say they want their data for all their citizens who live in China to stay in China. So no organization operating in China should have data for Chinese residents outside. So basically what that means, it blocks off access of the data from the UK government. And at the same time, in terms of UK GDPR, we're talking about Brexit. So once the UK is out of Europe, the way the rules work are completely different because UK, they'll be standing alone. They won't be in the EU anymore. So what that means is you cannot have data of a UK company or a UK citizen residing outside without their permission. So you can only imagine millions of people. You cannot physically go to someone and say, "Oh, are you okay for us to have your data in Europe? Are you okay to have your data to this place?" That's just a costly exercise and which is unachievable. So what Microsoft went to do here from a strategic point of view, they said to China, "We'll give you a data center which stays there." They came across in UK, "We'll build data centers for you quickly. They'll stay in the UK." This only happened recently. Before, UK companies didn't have a problem in having the data in Ireland, in Dublin. They didn't have any problem having the data in Amsterdam. But again, this is geographical changes. Another very good example is Germany. Germany has exactly privacy laws like that. So they actually have a government cloud data center, which is just dedicated to the German government. They also have the ones which is for organizations which can be used. So again, you're sitting here, you're being given this task from an organization or from somebody to say, we need to go to the cloud. The question here is to say, where is that data going? Where is the data going to sit? From a customer point of view, from myself or any of you on the call, we do give our data to organizations, but I can tell you most of the time we don't know where that data is. However, there is some people out there who have the time and the energy as well. They'll spend a lot of time asking this question, where is my data? The moment they find out the data is in the wrong place, they go and pick them up on the case of GDPR. And then in some cases, there's lawsuits, the organization gets fined, then it puts the reputation of the organization in a bad place. So we also have someone saying Huawei is trying to launch their OS, and as a result, will remove their data from Google. Yep, that's 100% right. So that's again those geographical, political decisions which are made across different regions. So the laws in Zimbabwe, where I come from, or the laws in South Africa, or in Nigeria, or in Ghana, in Cameroon, in Senegal, those countries, they operate with different laws. So a law which applies in a specific country does not necessarily mean it applies to another country. So one of the things which you need to remember, it's when Microsoft introduced these data centers, one of the things which came with it, it's when these data centers were built or when they're built in Europe or in a specific regions, what that means there is also agreements of what a government can request from that data center. Has anyone ever noticed when either a country in Australasia, in Africa, in Europe, they get someone with an Apple iPhone? Some cases, it takes a lot of time for them to actually get the data because they have to go through court processes in the American region, in America, because Apple is based in the US. And in some cases, they turn around and say, we don't have an obligation to give you that data. So that's why they keep now pushing to put legislations in place to say, you need to give us this if there's criminal activity. So again, those are dependent on the operating model of the organization. So we're going to talk about availability zones. So when we talk about availability zones, we're talking about separate locations within an Azure region. So already we're spoken about a region. So in this example, I'm going to give South Africa as an example where the two data centers are. So when we have availability sets, the main reason for that is to provide isolation in the event one goes down, the other one will always continue working. So I don't know if some of us have had the experience in terms of machines, those boxes, those desktop machines under our table or on top of our table, and then it goes down. And then the next thing you're thinking, okay, I need to go and purchase another one to replace it. That process in itself, it doesn't take less than 20 minutes. Whereas when you're using Microsoft Azure, it's automatic. It knows my pair here or my connection has gone down, so I need to go and connect to the other one. And at the same time, we spoke about these machines running at high speeds. So there's also phases where they are turned down, so they're not running at high speeds, so they can actually cool down. So in that process, the customer still expects good performance. So that's where the availability zone comes into it. So you can have a zone 1, zone 2, zone 3. You can have zone 4 and zone 5. The only thing you need to remember here, the more you have or the more you consume, the more costly it becomes as well. Yeah, so I have someone who says these laws might lead to having data centers to specific for each country. 100% agreed. So I've mentioned we have 154 countries representing 54 regions. So there is more data centers coming. So those are actually being built. So yes, the answer there is 100% right. So there is more to come. So if you see, for example, we mentioned those 2 data centers down in South Africa, the countries on the west, they're going to have a high demand and they're going to say we need it to be up there as well. So as long there's a strategic decision, a strategic move, you'll see they'll start appearing there as well. So if some of you who joined the previous session, I mentioned Amazon, they are building data centers in Ghana as we speak. So it just shows you the demand for cloud services. So in terms of availability zones, you can have an availability zone outside your own country. So in the event there's a massive problem within your country, you can also route it outside. But again, this involves you speaking to your data protection officer or the privacy team within your organization. So someone says, is there a limit to a number of data centers that can be situated within a region? The answer here, no, there's no limit. It just depends how the demand is. So if we go back a step to a slide I'll show you here. So if you see, as an example, America is a huge place, but if you see all these data centers, they're in America. So other regions, for example, in China, there's quite a lot of data centers as well in China. So the answer there is there can be as much as required within the specific space. So we're talking about resource groups. We're talking about a unit of management for your resources. What do I mean by resources? We've already spoken about virtual machines. We've spoken about things being on the cloud. We have a storage disk. We have applications on the cloud. So those applications, they are in a specific area. So once we have an Azure resource group, what it does, it allows you to set up permissions on who can actually access your services or who can actually access those resources in there, your virtual machines. The other thing it gives you the ability to do metering and billing, so you can actually see how much you're using before it's too late. You can set up some policies to say, I don't want people connecting outside the work network. So if you're working from home, you won't be able to connect. You need to have either a VPN to connect to the internal network for you to be able to use that resource group. You can also set monitoring. So monitoring and alerts is very, very important. because if there's any problems with your services, you will get notified via an email, and you can also see it on the Azure portal. So those are very, very important for you as someone who's working as either part of this project or you're supporting this project. Main reason for that is you want to be able to give an answer. The last thing you want to do is someone says, "Oh, we have a slight performance issue here." Then the answer you normally give there is, "I don't know." Ideally, we don't want to do that. So I would recommend we familiarize ourselves with monitoring alerts and policies. So, who would want to see me create a resource group? Let's see some yeses if someone is interested to see how we create a resource group. Okay, you can see some yeses there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back to the demo to this uh, slides. I'm going to bring a screen in here. So with that screen, I'm going to put it here, and I'm going to go to my portal. So you type in portal.azure.com. It's going to ask me to log in, and then yes, where we're going to go to Azure. So we are now in Azure. It's telling me how many credits I have left. So what you have in here, this is your dashboard, and this is called the blade. So you're seeing your items here within Azure. If you cannot see them here and you're not familiar, what I also advise you is to use this search option in here. So we're going to go to resource groups because we're talking about resource groups here, and we're going to add a new one. So you're gonna see, can everyone still see my screen? I don't wanna keep going, then you guys are not seeing and you're missing out. If I can get some 1 or 2 people saying yes, okay, brilliant stuff. So what you're seeing here, this is the trial Azure platform, and you can see here it's telling me it's a free trial, and I need to give my resource group a name. So I'm going to call this Blue Sky Demo. And then in here, we spoke about you having the capacity to select which region you want your resources to be located. So you see now we're talking about US, US to South Central US. Keep going. So in here, I'm going to deliberately select South Africa North, just for demo purposes. So if you can see here now, I have our name, it's accepted the name. If you put the name in here and it doesn't like it, it will tell you. It will also tell you what name to put as suggestion. So the next thing here is I'm going to select review. So validation has passed. And now if you see, I now have an option, download a template for automation. So it also gives you the ability to have templates to say, okay, you want to create this more. So it just gives the template and you can just run a script and you'd automatically go and do it in that specific region. So for the purpose of the demo, I'm going to select create. And so what it's doing now is validating. And if you see here, it's now 8:35 p.m. It's telling me creating resource group, Blue Sky demo in subscription free trial succeeded. So I'm going to say go to the resource group. And in here, we have our resource group. Now within our resource group, that allows us to manage our resources. I can now add a virtual machine within this resource group. This virtual machine, can anyone guess where this virtual machine will be located? Anyone want to guess where this virtual machine will be located if I implement it here? Brilliant stuff. So we have someone saying London. Yep, so you can have it in London, but in here, because we have set our resource group to be South Africa North, so if we create it in here, it will be located in South Africa. So if I say now, you see, it's now asking me if I want a Windows Server 2016 data center. It's asking me for an Ubuntu server. It's asking me for a web app. It's asking me for a SQL server. There's a whole lot of items it's asking me to do. So I'm going to go for a SQL database. So once I click the SQL database, it will do something. So if you see in here, it's picked up the resource group. So for those who say London, at this point, if you have a resource group in London, you can change it here, or you can create a new resource group in the UK. So for the purpose of this demo here, we're going to give our database name. So this database is going to be called Coding Kids. Then it's accepted that's acceptable. And then it's asking me to select a server. So if you see, there's no server available. So what option do I have at this point? The point is to create a new one. If you see, it's opened on the side in here. So the name of this, again, I'm going to give it Coding Kids. Okay, that's fine. Server admin login. We're going to say Joe Blogs. Okay, it likes that. Password, I'm just going to put temporal on here. It likes that. And we put another one in here, Communicard 22. You can try and have that. And now if you see, it's asking me where this server should be located. So we're going to change the location to South Africa North. And then can you see what happened? So it's telling me I cannot create this subscription in this specific location because that type of server is not available. So I'm going to try another region. So one of the benefits of Azure, it tells you where things are going wrong. So in here, I'm going to select UK South. Okay, UK Europe, UK West. So we can go for this one, and it doesn't have it there either. So it tells me one of the regions. Let's see this one here. In America, it will always have it. So they have everything there. So it's accepted it for the US. So I'm going to select OK. So once I select OK, it then connects it here. And if you see in here, I can configure the database. So at the moment, it's telling me it's using 10 DTUs. So these are the amount of processors it's using for this SQL database. So if I want to be honest with you, if it's a high performing database, this won't be enough. You need to go to a premium one, and a premium one, you're talking about 250 to 500 DTUs. And I can tell you on a monthly basis, that normally cost you about £2,000 to run that database, doing lots of high speeds. And it's got 250 gig of storage. So now I can say review and create. If you see in here, it's now telling me how much it will cost a month. So as we go along with the sessions, I think it's the session after next week, we're going to cover the Azure pricing and also how you can be able to sit down with any organization or your friends to calculate how much it will cost you to use the cloud. So in here, I'm going to select create. So what you can see in here is initializing the deployment. And then now it's submitting the deployment. It's looking at what we have. And then it starts to go in the background and it starts doing things. So in here, what you can see is telling me the deployment is underway. So in some cases, that could take some time. But when I say some time, it's always less than 10 minutes. So there we go. We start seeing things are coming in here. It's been accepted, and it's still telling us it's underway. Once it's completed, it will tell us it's completed. So we're talking about just deploying this on the cloud. One of the things you also need to remember here, in many organizations, it's only a few who might not have this capability. There will be a network engineer. So a network engineer will come in here, they set up their networking to allow areas where they want people to access this from, how they put their firewalls in place. The security team will also look at the design to say, okay, this is what you have. What is the network team doing about this? So normally you're not just alone when you're doing a cloud deployment. There's other teams involved. So do not be scared when you start hearing networking security. The most important thing for you to understand is that basic understanding of how secure the cloud is, to understand how people can connect to that machine when it's on the cloud. So while this is going, you can see deploying the servers is okay and is created. It also gives you operation details. So you can actually see what it's doing. It's creating, it's running. You can also copy this operation ID if you happen to get into a problem, and you can get to Microsoft and say, okay, this is the operation ID. They will be able to see this operation on the telemetry on their side. So that's one of the benefits of the cloud. You're not sitting here and saying to someone from Microsoft, "Oh, come and have a look, it's not working." So normally you give them this ID, they will also show you the problem very, very quickly. So here our SQL database has been created, and now it's telling us here, and you also have notifications which come in here. So I'm going to go to the notification, and it's telling me this has been deployed. And then if you can start seeing now, I'm within a SQL database. So there's one guru on this call I've seen join. His name is Deji. He's a guru with SQL databases. I've seen him use those things very, very well. So if you can see now, we have our database. It's telling us the location. It's telling us the subscription ID. You can also put tags. So why are tags important? You can only imagine you're going to have loads of this SQL database in some cases. So if you have tags, it can be a tag to a resource group, or it can be a tag to meet operational needs in an organization. So it will be worth for an organization to know how to get to the specific tag. So for Microsoft, the tag doesn't really mean a lot to them. These IDs are important. So if you see, if I put my mouse here, automatically it gives me an option to copy. So one of the things why the SQL database is important, for some people who use Dynamics 365, Dynamics 365 is a cloud service, so you won't have access to the database. So Microsoft gives you the ability to have a replica database, which you can only read and you cannot write back to it. So what you need is this subscription ID to set up in Dynamics 365. So you now have an Azure SQL database, which is on your private cloud, because this Azure cloud platform, you're creating infrastructure as a service. So it's owned by yourself. So what then happens there is once you connect it, you start seeing your performance in here. It's telling me I've only used 4 meg because there's nothing, it's a freshly new item. So just to help you bring this together, we had someone from Microsoft who joined us last Tuesday on a session, Chris Huntingford. He spoke about the Power Platform. He spoke about Power BI. He spoke about Power Apps. He spoke about Power Automate. So how this joins up together, you now have Power BI, which is currently in preview. So you can create a Power BI dashboard from an Azure SQL database. You don't necessarily need to go to SQL to Power BI. You can actually do it directly from here. Power Apps. You saw a demo for those who saw it. where you can create an app for yourself. This can be the data source. This can be the storage area. So if you see, everything is coming together. Power Automate for making automations, for creating workflows in the background. So all these things are available in here. So we spoke about availability zones. So what you can then do, you have something here called geo-replication. So you can replicate this database in a different data center. However, one thing we all need to be careful here when we create um, these replications is the cost element. So you can create a replication to another data center. It doesn't mean you're only being charged for one, you will now be charged for two. So we have something here from Dami saying you created a resource group in SA, but SQL database was created in US. So does that mean the resource group can only access the SQL database? Yep, that's correct. So you need to access that database through this resource group. So what tends to happen is, in most cases, there is security which is put in place on these resource groups. So if you don't belong to that resource group, then you won't have access to it. So if you see in here, you start having things like saying set firewall. There's a whole lot of things you can do in here. However, what's mainly important here is for you to understand these things exist. We spoke about monitoring. We have alerts in here. We spoke about metrics. We spoke about diagnostic settings. You can automatically set this to say if the threshold goes over 5%, can you send a diagnosis email to say your threshold has been exceeded? You can also look at the logs of how your database is operating. You can also go to a new support request. So you're not going anywhere else, it's in one place. So once you raise a new support request in here, normally it reads up the identifiers of your area where you are, and then you can put in a small brief definition of what you can do. So we have someone here, can you run SQL queries from the Azure portal? Yes, you can. For those who use SQL, correct, you can. SQL is something which has passed me, and I'm still bugging Dej to teach me that myself. But yes, you can run SQL queries from the Azure portal. You can also run these SQL queries from a SQL Management Studio. You can also run these queries from Power BI Report Builder if you're building some of these reports, which will be paginated reports, which will also result in scheduled reports if there's a requirement for your organization to do that. So we've created our database in here. We have the name, there's analytics here. You can also export a template of this if you ever want to create something similar. You don't need to go through those steps again. One thing you need to remember is when you create a template, it will have those settings. So if you don't change them and you don't want this location, then yes, it will just go and create it in there. And in terms of this compute utilization, it's telling me the utilization of how this is being used. So if you see all along here at 8 p.m., can anyone have a guess why it's very, very low at 8 p.m., 8:30 p.m., then it just all of a sudden came back up here, then went down? Feel free to type any suggestions in the chat window. Okay, so we have a question here. I'll come back to, okay, so let's just cover the first one. So George is here, perfect answer. We created a server at that time, that's correct. So at this point, this is when we created it. Before, there was nothing created. So this just shows you in the past hour. And another one as well, which is 504 guest. You just said, yes, we provisioned the resource group at that time. Correct answer. So if we then see at this point here, that's when you provision it. So there's a lot of processes happening in the deployment. So it used a lot of DTUs. So those processes are being used. So it's up, then it finishes its deployment, it goes back to its resting state. So going back to a question from Yomi, is there any additional cost for using Power BI, Power Apps, etc. on the platform, or is part of the subscription? So if you want to use Power BI, it is a paid for service. If you want to use Power Apps, it is a paid for service. So most organizations, what they will have, they'll have either an A-free license, which is part of Office 365. So if an organization has an A-free license, it gives them access to Power Apps, and it also gives them access to Power Automate. However, with Power BI, it gives you a free license. Why is it free? It is free because they only allow you to have a starting point. So you cannot do complex stuff with a free Power BI license. So what tends to happen is, from a marketing point of view, from Microsoft, which I applaud them very well, is you start using it, then you realize you can't do something without a professional license. So eventually you're forced to go and buy it because you know you can do some cool stuff with it. So they always give you a free license. So even for you guys on the call, you can have a free Power BI license, but you cannot do the complex stuff. You cannot share that dashboard with anybody else. There's one person on the call who I know has a professional license. I'm gonna have to name the person. Apologies. Deji has a professional license for Power BI. So someone asked, what is a DTU? So a DTU, it's the resources your VM is using. So when you talk about the resources, it's about the resources assigned to help processes on your machine. Does anyone remember RAM on a laptop or RAM on a computer? So basically, that's exactly along the same lines. If we have those DTUs and the high, so if you see in here, let me just change it and I'll show you something. You see what happens here. So at the moment, we are running in standard and we are running at 10. So what that means is our SQL database is not going to be able to handle heavy workloads at all. So if you, let me just close this out, not now. And if you see, if I move this across, can you see what it's now telling me? You're using a free trial subscription, which is limited to performance level not higher than S1. So S1 is standard, which is 10 in here. So you can go as much as here, where it becomes very, very super fast. It will become a super computer. Can anyone see the price of our free 3000 DTUs on the bottom right-hand side? It's now 3,385. So this one I'm using at 10 is basically £11 a month. So it's cheaper, but I can run heavy workloads. So for those who work on the Dynamics 365 projects or space, you need to have it running from 200 on a minimum. So it cannot run on a basic workload. It has to start on a standard 100 DTUs, which is 111 £80 a month. So all these costs here, most of the time you won't be required to know most of these costs because we have some lovely project managers on these calls. Those are the ones who look at these costs, or they have access to check these costs as well. So for yourself, if you're an Azure engineer, or if you're a dynamic specialist, Office 365 business analyst, sometimes these prices, the project manager takes ownership of them. So we're going back to go to our slides. We'll come back here before the end of the session. So we spoke about the resource group. We've created one. We've seen us creating one here. Let's go to the next slide. We have Azure Resource Manager. So we have already spoken about what this Azure Resource Manager is when we're going through our virtual machine or our resource group. So basically, a resource group manager, it helps us to manage our infrastructure through templates rather than scripts. We can view resources that are linked to the dependencies. We can control access. Again, we're talking about automating things using different tools. We have seen where it gives us the option for a template. We can configure. When we say configure, that's where we have set up our database to be in the Americas. Main reason for that is not available in Africa on a trial basis. It's not to say if you pay for it, you can't get it. It will be in Africa, but you can't have it on a free trial. So that data center which I went into, which says US, they basically have every single thing Microsoft offers on the cloud. So if you ever want to try new things, you need to target that data center. It will give you all the new cool functionality which you may not see in a data center in Europe. But the key thing for you to understand is, do you have a use case for that cool stuff you might see? So you have seen subscriptions, management of resource groups, where we can create policies. You have seen the resource group we created, which was a Blue Sky. And we have seen the resources within the resource group, which was the SQL database for coding kids. So the SQL database was just one of the things we could put in there. There's much, much more we can put in there. Before the end of the session, I will endeavor to put another resource in our Blue Sky resource group. So now we're going to look at Azure core services and some of the products involved within Azure. So we're talking about Azure Compute. So when you talk about Azure Compute, it's the ability to create resources or the ability to create functions on the cloud on demand. So when I say on demand, for those who've been in the IT industry for so long, you'll be in the industry. And back then, I think 15 years ago, you need to have some more servers. The first thing you need to do is to order them, speak to your supplier. Your supplier tell you, okay, they'll cost this, they'll get ordered, they'll then get delivered to you. You then need to configure it to meet your organizational needs. You need to put your antiviruses, you need to set up your firewalls. That process in itself can take days, in some cases weeks, and I've seen it for months for this organization I'm currently working for. They decided to order some laptops, and so far it's taken them 3 months. Of course, one of the reasons is the virus, but one of the advantages of using virtual machines is always there. So what I mean by Azure Compute, the key thing for you to understand here is on demand. Whenever you wake up, for example, you wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning, you say, okay, yeah, I need a virtual machine. You click a button and it provisions it for you. I'm sure you have seen us provisioning a SQL database. It was less than 10 minutes. It was ready for us to use. So for those who have worked with SQL, for those who have come across servers, you can imagine how long it takes to actually install the software in itself on that machine. So that resource is available on demand all the time. And again, we spoke about 10 DTUs on a standard subscription, and they were costing us about £11 a month. You also need to understand the cost implications. So I've seen an organization in the past, let's go to the cloud, is brilliant. They're going to launch that SQL database. Mainly, I give reference to Dynamics because that's the area I normally work in as well. They've spun up these two SQL databases. One has been said it's for failover. So once that's been created, it was running on the maximum. So when the bill came at the end of the quarter, it was very, very high. And then the finance team started saying, we are better off to use our old systems because this is expensive. So a review was done, and it came across that the mistake was done by the engineer who set up these servers. What do you think happened to this person? If anyone want to guess in the chat window what happened to this person? Oh, yes, someone said fired, someone said sacked, someone said sacked. Yeah, so this person, they were just lucky. Basically what they were done, they were demoted. They were taken out of the project. They were told to go and do first line support because the other option for them was to either just leave the role. So some of those things we need to be careful. If we're not so sure, then just to click these buttons, let's speak to your colleagues, your peers. If you're not comfortable, come back on the Blue Sky Telegram group. Let's have that conversation. Let's help and support each other, and we can all understand what we need to do within our project areas. So that's the Azure Compute. So I'm sure you've seen that on the. This will be under the blade. So I'm going to show you this as well within Microsoft Azure. So let's go back to Azure database where we've been here. So in this area here, this is where we are, and you can start seeing some of the things in here. We have all resources. So if you see, it's telling me I've got some unsaved edits, which is here. I don't really need to save them. I'll say okay. And it tells me the resources I currently have. So in here, I'm going to say to look for an app. So if you see it says App Dynamics, straight away it's giving me these services here. So it can be a function app. So what Azure gives you is the ability for you to create logic apps. So what that means is you can have something called a service bus, which is a listening service in Azure. So what I mean by that is for those who use some systems, this service just listens to say, okay, from this website, if this action happens, if this record is updated, if this record is created, if this record is deleted, can you do this action? So you can do this in here. One of the questions you might ask me in here is, what's the difference between using Power Automate and Azure Function Apps? So Azure Function Apps, they are more advanced and they have more capability as compared to Power Automate. Power Automate is still maturing. It's not 100% quite there yet. So many people, those who have development background, they'll come in here and they'll create an app. So we have someone saying, I thought prior to deployment, requirements for the configuration would have been gathered from the relevant key service stakeholders for the engineers and guidance. 100% right. So yes, the requirements could have been captured. So one of the things is what you see within the industry. Some of our colleagues who do the requirements capturing, they're not familiar with the cloud themselves. So they'll tell the customer or the stakeholders, yes, we can. Yes, that's possible. Then they'll write up something which is amazing. Then the detail in itself does not specify what is required. So in some cases, you hear that this system uses high. That's one of the things about having the basic knowledge of Azure. So whether you're a project manager, whether you're a business analyst, whether you work for the PMO office, whether you are a QA tester, just to have a basic understanding of this technology goes a long way in having this discussion or when we are collecting these requirements from our stakeholders. So We spoke about virtual machines. So does anyone still remember what infrastructure as a service is? For those who were on the session last week, does anyone want to volunteer to tell us if they still remember what Azure VMs and infrastructure, what mainly infrastructure as a service is? Does anyone want to volunteer for that? So it can be a suggestion, anyone? So in here, can anyone tell us if they still remember what is meant by infrastructure as a service? So the clue here is keep in mind, we created a SQL database. We created an Azure resource group. So if someone want to have a suggestion of what they think infrastructure as a service is. Okay, so we have someone saying on-site machines, quite close, data center. Thank you for bringing the suggestion forward. Anyone else? So if you remember in our previous session, we spoke about private cloud. We talk about public cloud. We talk about the hybrid cloud. So we have our private cloud where I've created Blue Sky, a resource group, where I've created our coding SQL database. So that SQL database belongs to my private cloud. So creating a SQL database in there, it's actually a computer I've created, which is running a SQL database. So that is infrastructure as a service. And if you see we have someone, Yomi, that's a brilliant answer. So if anyone want to see what infrastructure as a service is, please have a look at what Yomi has put in there. That's very spot on. We also have someone who says business rent or lease center. There is a cost implication when you provision these machines. Someone says provisioning of infrastructure in the cloud. Again, spot on. I'm pleased we're all together on this. Awesome stuff. So we have VM scale sets. So again, VM scale sets, again, they give you the ability to automatically go to add another VM if one of your machines fail. So one of the things you need to remember here, it sounds amazing that a computer fails, automatically goes to another. What Microsoft don't tell you, they don't tell you the cost element. You only find out when you start provisioning these things. So when you speak to your stakeholders, you need to be able to let them know that they are paying for it. It's not a free thing. They can have one, but if that fails, it cannot automatically goes to anywhere. So if those who remember the previous session, someone asked, is the cloud cheaper? I said no. So those are the reasons why it's not cheap. So they give you these amazing items, and yourself, you think, okay, great. Nothing is going to go wrong anymore. I can sleep. No one is going to call me out at night to say something has gone wrong. That's one of the problems of Azure and any cloud service. There's a cost element to it. So platform as a service. So can someone tell me what they think platform as a service is? Anyone want to have a suggestion? I've seen brilliant answers there already, so I'm really confident we're together on this one. So we're talking about a platform as a service. Does anyone use Salesforce on this SIS platform or ever heard of Salesforce? If I can get a yes, Salesforce online or Dynamics online. Okay, great. So basically, what happens is if you're using Salesforce, if you're using Dynamics 365, they give you as a software as a service. They give you the system and they give you the platform for you to then start running your items. So Salesforce, Amazon Service, now ServiceNow, etc. examples of PaaS. Yeah. So again, We have Yomi here, which is telling us something. We also have Azure DevOps from Deji. So you have Azure DevOps. Most of the time you say it is Azure DevOps. Then yourself within your teams, you discuss and start saying, okay, we need to have this in Azure DevOps. We are going to rename it to say Blue Sky. Not all of us want something which is out of the box. So Salesforce, yes, it's a SaaS product, but it's running on a platform which is not your own virtual machine. So Salesforce, yes, it's a software as a service, but you do not own the virtual machine. It's not your infrastructure as a service. So they're giving you the platform to be able to run your SaaS service. We also spoke about functions. That's one I just covered a few moments ago, which is logic functions, which are a bit more advanced than Power Automate to perform compute actions based on an event. So what I mean by that is, apart from a record being updated, you could also say if the virtual machine is running at maximum capacity, can you auto scale to another virtual machine? So those are some of the functions which can be deployed. Again, is for you to understand it does exist. You won't be expected to go and start creating these things unless if you decide to dive into it and become an expert. That makes you stronger as well. But for you to understand these things exist is very important. So container services. Anyone had anything about containers? Containers on the cloud? Is anyone? Yep, we have Deji there. Great. So some of the container services here within Microsoft Azure, you have something called a blob storage. So what a blob storage allows you to do is you can store your documents, you can store your images, you can store your videos. If you get to a specific amount of data, it automatically expands. So you will never be able to finish the storage for the blob storage. One thing I can tell you as well is very, very cheap to use. And why is it so cheap to use? Because it just dumps your data, not in any order, it just dumps it in the area. Then for you to try and organize it sometimes can be a nightmare. So normally when you talk about blob storages, those who have heard about machine learning, normally those blob storages are used for machine learning, because once you train your machine, it now knows when it sees these things in that blob container. It's okay, I have this, and it will take it out. Anyone heard of machine learning? Okay, great. Yeah, so we're going to cover machine learning because it's also part of Azure. So machine learning will come as part of a product of Azure. So in terms of network services, we're talking about virtual networks, we're talking about load balancers, we're talking about VPNs, we're talking about application gateways, we're talking about content delivery network. That's the one I'm going to emphasize on. It allows you to bring web content to the local regions closer to your users. So someone's asking, what is the difference between orchestrator and cloud? Can you please enlighten me or help and explain a bit more what you mean by orchestrator? So while we wait for that, yeah. So in terms of networking in itself, these are some of the network services available. I'm not a network specialist myself, so I'm not going to dive in and start telling you how a VPN gateway works, because it's not an area I cover myself, but I know these things exist. So if I go and ask a network engineer, I then go and say, how does a load balancer work in my system? That way they understand where I'm coming from. So for you just to have a basic understanding of it is great, but for me personally, I'm not an expert in terms of networking. but it's something you just need to know is part of Azure services. Question, does Azure have open source capability, i.e. users coding input for customization? Yes, it has that. I will show you towards the end of this session. I have something about that. Do you have workspaces on Azure like AWS? So how does workspaces work on AWS? If we can help understand that. I know AWS exists. I've never used it myself. So if you can expand a bit more of how workspaces work on AWS, then I can see what matches that on Azure. So we're now looking at desktop computing cloud. Yep, so we have desktop computing cloud. So Microsoft have something which is in the pipeline. It's been going on, I think, for over a year now. And to be quite honest with you, it hasn't taken off. I think one of the challenges there is possibly the competitors doing more than them. So yes, Microsoft has something like that, but it's it's not up to scratch yet. So we're talking about Azure storage services. So we have infrastructure as a service, platform as a service. So we can have our disks, which is a persistent disk on a VM. We can have premium storage. We can have storage drives, lift and shift operations. So when we say lift and shift operations, it's you have your physical computer on premise. You can connect it to just lift your data from there to the cloud onto your disk. You don't need to run any complex stuff. So Microsoft will give you the connector to do it. So has anyone worked with any storage or files on this call?
Destiny.
Yep.
To come and watch.
Thought you're volunteering to speak. So, okay, so in here, we have the infrastructure as a service, storage services. We're also going to see what we have under the platform as a service. So you have block blobs, you have page blobs, append blobs. That's mainly, like I said to you, it's unstructured data. It's just there. You just have loads of storage, and it's cheap as well. So you also have tables, which have dynamic scaling. So when talking about tables, that's why you can start talking about things like querying the data export service for Dynamics, which has the data coming from a Microsoft database. Has anyone worked with queues and messages? So for those who worked in Dynamics, I can give an example. Deji can, I think he might remember this. There's an organization which we worked in the past. They had something called RabbitMQ. So basically what that RabbitMQ, it would listen to messages from Dynamics 365, mainly the system in itself. And if something goes wrong, either it's a workflow, it then triggers an action. So within Microsoft Azure, that's where the service bus and logic functions come into it. They listen to these messages and then they process them to do something. Again, the whole idea here is automation, to put in simple terms, automating the process and at the same time saving you time. So databases. So we also have now something called an Azure Cosmos database, which can be distributed across the globe to other departments. So you can have an organization which is a multinational organization, and if the data laws permit, they can stretch that to different regions. If you can use an Azure SQL database, you also see we put our database in the Americas. So you can have these databases. For those who worked with databases, there's something called always on. So what always on does, it automatically syncs your databases. This dependent on a business case. So it can sync in real time, which means you need a high performance. It can sync every 10 minutes. So again, it depends how you want to use it. So when you use always on, it is also important to think of the cost element. So that's why when we build things on the cloud, we need to have an understanding of what we're putting ourselves into. So Azure data migration is basically, like they say here, straightforward. It's a managed service which allows you to connect your existing database to the cloud. So once you say to Microsoft, we need to go to the cloud, in some cases they'll come to you and say, okay, what are you looking to achieve? What are you looking to do? And then once they understand it, they say, okay, you have a database there. We're going to give you a connector. This is a connector. They'll demo it to you. They'll show you how it works. Then you can connect your database. You migrate your data to the cloud. So for those who worked within Dynamics, if you have your database on premise, there's something called lifecycle services. It migrates your data, your tables from on-premise to the cloud. Normally it does it within 1 hour, and it's done, is ready for you to use. So we're now talking about the Azure Marketplace. So someone asked, does it allow people to develop and customize things? So yes, with Azure Marketplace, you can develop something of your own, which you think does some amazing stuff. It gets validated by Microsoft, and once they validate it, they will then open it for other people to use. So again, you have spent all your time developing and customizing something, right? They're not just going to give it for free. You're gonna charge a price for it, so people can start buying into that development you've done, into that customization you've done. So there's loads of these custom things which have been developed, and there's more to come. So it takes a group of us to come up with an idea to say, okay, let's develop this. It gets done, it goes to Microsoft. Normally it takes 3 months for it to get approved because they make sure there's no data loss, or there's nothing within your development which is trying to extract data out. So they make sure the security is in place, they make sure it's safe, they make sure it's resilient. So as much as you have tested yourself, they also tested themselves. So again, if you're looking to develop items to have on Azure Marketplace, it's available for you to do. So I'm going to go to Azure Solutions. Being cautious of time, I'll try be as quick as I can. This is the last area anyway for this session. However, I will have 10-15 minutes at the end to carry on to answer any questions you may have, and also to do a recap for our colleague who did ask earlier. So anyone ever heard of IoT? If I can have some yeses and some nos, that would be great. Yep, Internet of Things. That's 100% right. So that is also a solution which is available in Dynamics, in Microsoft Azure for any organization to use. Again, it depends with how you want to use it. So the whole idea of showing you Internet of Things is for you to understand the depth and the offering what Azure gives you. So Internet of Things in itself, it's a solution. It does quite a lot of amazing things. But the question is, do you need to be doing all this? Simple answer could be maybe not. Another answer could be yes. So again, the importance here about knowing about Internet of Things is for you to know what is capable of Azure, what you can do in Azure. what you can offer to your customer. You don't want to go into an organization as a business analyst, as a project manager, and you just say, okay, yeah, I came to manage your project. We need to migrate from on-premise to the cloud, and then it finishes. You need to bring more value. You need to add something to the table. So you can now start talking about Internet of Things. You can start talking about machine learning. So you can start talking about chatbots. So again, you are bringing value to the customer. Of course, one can say, okay, they only ask me to come in to do this migration. What tends to happen if it's a contract role, your contract get extended. If it's a permanent role, when it comes to either to promotion, if you're looking for a pay rise, the conversion becomes a bit more easier because you're bringing something to the table. So big data and analytics, this is one of the biggest things happening at the moment within the cloud space, analytics. So as much as we enter data, as much as we collect data, stakeholders, directors, they need to see the data. So you have something called Azure SQL data lake. So again, you see, it's talking about enterprise. We're not talking about some medium, large organizations here. So they want to see some of these insights. We have spoken about Power BI. There is also Oracle, which brings these insights. We're talking about Oracle, right? With Oracle, you can also connect to Microsoft Azure. I've seen some of my colleagues connecting to Microsoft Azure and bring some amazing analytics and amazing visuals to show to their organization. So again, whatever you do on the marketplace, whether it's Azure, whether it's AWS, whether it's Salesforce, anything you go and do on the market, they're also very, very interested in the analytics. So if you're a business analyst, yeah, it's amazing we capture those requirements, but always remember to pose the question about analytics. Because if they capture the data and they're not seeing the outputs, then the data is basically meaningless for them. So artificial intelligence, I don't know if you guys have been on a bank, for those in the UK, those who use NatWest, for those in Nigeria, those who use some of the internet services where you start getting something asking you questions. So in some cases, for those in UK, if you speak, if you put your own language in there, which is not English, it gets confused. Then it says, oh, I'm going to try and direct you to a person, or it will tell you we're currently closed. But if you put something in there and it thinks, okay, it knows what you're saying, it will keep giving you suggestions, it will keep going. So again, Azure machine learning is based on you training it. It's based on you testing it, testing before you give it to the people to use. So once you have it, so if you see, for example, the number plate recognition, that's all part of machine learning. It now knows a number plate is formed of these numbers, of these characters. It reads it. Then in some cases, you get something for the letter post to say you are speeding. So again, it's becoming much, much clever. So for those who have an iPhone, I'm going to ask you to download an app which is called Seeing AI, Seeing Artificial Intelligence. Once you download it, take a picture of yourself. It will guess your color. It will guess if you're smiling. It will guess if you're moody. It will also guess your age. Most of the times, it gets it 1 out or 2 out. So it's getting closer and closer. It's learning humans as well. So those who have an iPhone, go and download it and try it for yourself. If you have money, you can ask it to read it for you to tell you how much money it is on the table. So we have serverless computing. We spoke about Azure Functions. We spoke about Azure Logic Apps. We spoke about Azure Event Grids. So I'm not going to cover this because I think I've gone over time. I do apologize, everybody. If someone has to go, I fully understand. For those who can stay, please do stay. So someone just asked me, what is Android? So Android is an operating system. We have Apple, which is iOS. We also have a Microsoft. So Windows in itself is an operating system. So an Android, it's an operating system. So if you have a Samsung, that runs on an Android platform. So DevOps, I've seen some of our colleagues here using DevOps to manage their project items. I've seen Azure Test Labs. I haven't seen those you guys using it, but for Azure DevOps, if anyone has questions on that, I kindly direct you to Deji or Patty or Mobalaji. I've seen those guys using DevOps. So Azure App Service, you can quickly build web and mobile apps. So for those who joined the call on Tuesday, you saw Chris Huntingford um, creating an app under 7 minutes. So Azure gives you that capability. You can create apps, you can optimize your DevOps systems, you can scale your high availability to make sure you have enough resources. Very good example is everybody is buying products for Christmas, come Christmas. If you ever seen the websites, normally they don't get busy. It only gets busy in the shops because you have long queues, because that's humans. If you go on a computer, you buy online, they know many customers are going to be coming to buy. So they make sure they have enough virtual machines. They make sure they have enough resources on the cloud, which responds to you and take your money. So someone says, what is the name of the app again, please, for iPhone? It's called Seeing AI. So let me just type it in the chat window. It's called Seeing AI. So that's the name of the app in itself. You don't need to sign in or anything. It just takes your picture. So one thing to remember here, we're talking about machine learning in terms of that app. The more you take your pictures, it's also learning about you. So that's exactly what happens. So I hope it's now intrusive though. So basically in terms of intrusion, for those again who have mobile devices, mostly those in the UK. If you check on your device, I don't know if you ever seen, they managed to pre-configure something for COVID-19 tracing on your phones without telling you. So if the government wishes to do something in your mobile device, unfortunately, they're able to. So it's something, again, which is there. It only gets traction if people start making noise about it. But yes, cloud and technologies nowadays, yeah, they're ever becoming more intrusive, that's for sure. So for those who use a doorbell, I have one myself. You guys, we know the data, the videos are stored on the cloud. We don't know where they are. We don't know who says it. So again, if they want to hack into it, if they want to get into it, it allows them to do so. So again, it then becomes a personal choice to say, can I do this or should I not do this? So we have Azure management tools. So I think what I'll do here is, are we okay to carry on to finish this, or are you happy for me to pick this up on the next session and add on to the next session? So someone just asked me, does it mean Seeing AI can be downloaded on Android? So to be quite honest with you, I last used an Android device, I think back in 2008. Since then, I've always used an iOS. I tried a Microsoft device. That trial only lasted for 2 weeks. I didn't like the Microsoft device. So I can see we have two people saying, let's carry on. Okay, great. So this is recorded anyway, so it will also be available to see. So we have the Azure portal, where we went to create our Azure resource group. There's also something called PowerShell and Azure command line and interface, Azure command line interface. Is anyone proficient in PowerShell or ever heard of PowerShell here? Anyone? Okay, we have someone who's heard about PowerShell. Yes, okay, we're getting quite a few. Amazing stuff. So let me bring the screen so we can see it. Let me just open it up here. So we can see this is our Azure portal. So in here, we have the Cloud Shell. So in here, you can open it, and you can open PowerShell. You can use Bash, you can use PowerShell. And in here, it's telling me you have no storage mounted because it wants you to have somewhere to have the scripts. So I'm going to create a storage. So I'm going to show you how you get to it. In terms of PowerShell, initial for those who don't understand PowerShell to an advanced level like myself, what I would say is for you to get started, there's loads of templates on GitHub. So everyone ever heard of GitHub? So GitHub is basically the gold mine where you can go and look at pre-configured items. You can update it to meet your own needs. So if you see in here, it's connecting to the terminal, then eventually to ask me to write something. So if you see in here, it's saying type AZ to use Azure CLI. And if you can see now, it's ready to go. So it now have PowerShell home. It has then my name, which means I'm the person who's running it. So if you don't have the right permissions to do things in Azure, it knows your profile, so it won't be able to run specific commands if you don't have the access. So in here, I'm going to type in help. And if you see, it's now giving me quite a few things to look at. Again, it gives you examples, get dash cloud drive. It lists the information, enter dash AZ VM. It starts an interactive remote session with your VM. So again, these are things, if you're not so sure, it gives you the option right at the top at the beginning. If you see there's quite a lot of them in here, I'm actually having to scroll up a lot. Press 1 or press H for help or Q to quit. I'm going to quit. It takes me back in here. So again, you can write your commands in here to do things via a script. For me personally, I'm very comfortable in using the portal interface because I don't come from a development or from a coding background. So if you're comfortable with the portal, you can use it. If you like PowerShell in some cases, which can be very quick and easy to do things in Azure, feel free to use it. Again, it is here. You initiate it here, it runs things. Apart from that, you can initiate PowerShell from your local machine. So let me see if I have it here. PowerShell, yep. So I have PowerShell in here. So I'm going to open it. So for most of you who have Windows machines, you will automatically have PowerShell on your machine. So if you see in here, it's pointing to my local drive, and that's my name here. It's not pointing here. So those who use PowerShell, you then need to connect and authenticate using your username and your password so it knows who is talking to, and then it goes and retrieves the rights you have. And you can start writing your commands using PowerShell. You're basically interacting with Azure from your local machine. That's basically what you're doing at that point. So is it available for everyone to use PowerShell? Yes, it is available. There's also a mobile app for Azure. So you can use a mobile app, which also gives you exactly the same interface I was seeing from the Azure portal. There is an Azure Cloud Shell, which is the one we went to initiate. So PowerShell, we initiated it from outside Azure. We also initiated it using the command lines. It's normally referred to the CLI. So if someone is saying CLI, that's basically what they're talking about. For those who love coding, who love development, you have something called a REST API. So a REST API, that's mainly for developers who just want to connect their things, develop their cool stuff, and connect with Azure and get things happening as well. So there's so many options available. The question is, which one is the best one here? The best one depends on which one you're comfortable with. So don't shy away if you get asked the question, okay, which one is okay for you? You can simply say, okay, Azure Portal. If you say PowerShell and you're not 100% certain about it, normally what happens is you get given a task to use PowerShell. And then you start thinking, okay, how do I do it? So we talked about Microsoft Teams the other day. So what then happens is if you have members of the organization, for example, 100, you can basically put their email address in a text file and run a PowerShell command to add them to a team. So you can only imagine from the portal, you can't bulk update these records. You have to do it manually. Where else if you do with PowerShell, you connect, you point it to the text file you have, it goes along and it goes and start adding people to the team. Is everyone still okay? I get worried when everyone goes silent. Okay, thank you, appreciate it. So we're almost there. So we also have something called Azure Advisor. So basically what Azure Advisor is basically giving you some recommendations. It's telling you any security recommendations you need to put in place. So in some organization, you have a security team. If you see any security recommendations in here, you can either flag it with them. If you see performance issues, this is mainly to do with your virtual machines, to do with your infrastructure you have set up on the cloud. You can raise it with the infrastructure team. In terms of the cost, of course, we don't raise this cost with the finance team. They will panic really badly. So this is raised with your project manager. High availability, you see there's some recommendations in there. You could say, okay, the other VM is running slower than the other one. It tells you what you need to do. So again, like I mentioned earlier, it gives you that Azure gives you that insight. So you are never left guessing to say, okay, how much is it going to cost me? Is there any security loopholes? There's an advisor that goes and looks at what you've done and it's just advising you. So if you have something in the security area where it's recommended, it does not guarantee a total success that you are foolproof. You cannot be hacked. Yeah. So basically, if you happen to get hacked and you haven't put in, your organization hasn't put in the correct security protocols in place, you cannot go and blame Microsoft and say, oh, Azure is not secure enough. The first thing they'll say to you is, did you have enough security in place yourself? Did you have a firewall in place? Did you have multi-factor authentication in place? And if you don't have it, they'll say to you, look at our documentation on what we recommend. So again, those are some of the disadvantages of using infrastructure as a service, because there's quite a bit of responsibility on you, even performance in itself. If you don't set it up properly, like I showed you about the DTUs, performance will be undesirable. So you cannot start blaming the service, the Microsoft service is rubbish. It's because we haven't followed the recommendations. So every single system or every single thing you put on Azure, there's always documentation surrounding it with a recommendation. It tells you with the cost as well. And there's also guidance on security. So most organizations will have this capability. So thank you again for staying.